The quest for the Holy Grail, an ancient relic believed to grant wishes, led the world into a destructive war. Masters, known as Meiji, summoned heroic spirits called servants and battled fiercely, eliminating anything or anyone in their path to claim the relic's immense power. This war raged on for years until the Holy Grail mysteriously vanished, prompting a temporary ceasefire among the Magi as they awaited its reappearance. A narrator recounts the story of a man dressed in white, created and left waiting for his summoning by the great goddess. When the time arrived, the goddess appeared, fulfilling an ancient prophecy. On Earth, a fierce battle erupted between magi and mythical creatures. Each mage showcased exceptional skill, defeating their enemies one by one. At a climactic point, opponents summoned their servants to engage in a brutal fight until only one survived. The battle concluded in a massive explosion caused by two of the most powerful servants, leaving both sides devastated. Years after this clash, a large, scarred man visited the Royal Magic Academy, seeking Professor Rocco Belfaban, head of summoning. A student guided him to the professor's office, where he was invited inside and seated. Addressing him as Necromancer, Professor Rocco began by explaining the Battle Royale war system used in the Third Holy Grail War. He continued, revealing a plot where foreigners stole the Holy Grail while it was being transported. Until recently, it was thought lost, but the Igd clan, known as the Black Faction, now holds it in Romania. One of their masters had hidden the Grail for 6 years, conducting research to achieve eternal youth. The unfortunate twist in this conflict lies in the head of the Igd clan's recent announcement of the Fourth Great Holy Grail War. Determined to break away from the Red Faction, or the Mage Association, the clan aims to establish its own independent sector. Anticipating resistance, they struck first. In retaliation, the association sent a force of 50 elite magi to crush the clan, but nearly all were defeated by a single servant, leaving only one survivor. Necromancer then asked the professor about his role in stopping the war. The professor explains that Necromancer must become a master, summoning his servant and joining 6 other mages to gather enough strength to fight the clan. Meanwhile, the Igd clan's head, Darnik, finalizes his own plans to tip the scales in their favor. Necromancer agrees to support the association, requesting an artifact for summoning his servant. Professor Rocco gives him a precious wooden artifact and introduces him to the remaining 6 magi who will fight alongside him in the Holy Grail War. With everything settled, Necromancer asks for an advance payment and then departs. By nightfall, Darnik engages in a chess game with his servant, Avisbron, discussing strategies for the upcoming battles. Avisbron, fully loyal, lets Darnik win, and shares their plans to create enough chimeras and pseudo-magi to gain the upper hand. Just then, a young overseer enters, inviting them to view the newly created golems. Eager, Darnik and Avisbron head to the lab, where Avisbron reveals his dream of bringing his golems to life, a vision the young boy hopes will come true. Elsewhere, Necromancer arrives at a graveyard to summon his servant. He draws a magic circle, places the artifact on a stone, and begins the incantation. At the same time, Darnik's magi also summon their servants to reinforce their side. When both summonings are complete, Darnik's servants introduce themselves and pledge loyalty to their new master. In contrast, Necromancer summons Mordred, a formidable woman, and the true heir to the throne of Arthur Pendragon. Mordred introduces herself and asks for the name of her summoner, leaving Necromancer momentarily stunned. A few years back, a young blonde woman was dragged through the streets of her village, accused of witchcraft. Tied to a stake, she faced a brutal execution by fire. As the flames rose, she dedicated her soul to her lord, seeking eternal rest. Now, the blonde, seemingly summoned from the underworld, is seen in her room, packing her belongings to step out. Once ready, she boards a night bus to meet her master, Necromancer. Meanwhile, at Darnik's castle in Igd, one of the servants, a somewhat unruly one, prompts the others to introduce themselves to liven up the palace. Each servant identifies themselves by their role: Rider, known as Astolfo, Archer, or Chiron, and others, all members of the Black Faction. Before all introductions are complete, a royal guard interrupts, forbidding them from such interactions. At that moment, Vlad Tepes, the king of Igd, delivers an inspiring speech to the servants, urging them to give their best. After summoning his servant, Necromancer introduces himself to Mordred by his true name, Sisigo Kairi. Mordred, however, criticizes his choice of location for the summoning. Though as a necromancer, it's hard to fault his methods. He teases Mordred about her gender, as she's historically considered male, which only provokes her. She holds her sword to his throat, making her displeasure clear, and reveals her ambition to use the Holy Grail's power to become King of England when the time is right. Necromancer has no objections and welcomes her to his side. Their next destination is the church, When Mordred questions the choice, Necromancer tells her it's time to confess their sins to the priest. Just outside Darnik's castle, one of his master magi summons a servant named Berserker and immediately tests her powers on a golem he specially prepared for her. With a single strike, Berserker obliterates the golem, demonstrating her formidable strength. Inside the castle, another magus, Fiore Igd Millennia, engages in a conversation with her own servant. Contrary to her expectations of a centurion, her servant, Archer, appears entirely human, but chooses to keep his true identity hidden. They discuss matters related to the Holy Grail War before the scene shifts. Meanwhile, the fourth master, Gordas Music Igd Millennia, the one who interrupted the others earlier, summons his servant, Saber, and questions him about his ambitions. To Gordas' surprise, Saber has no desire to claim the Holy Grail for himself, which frustrates Gords, leading him to dismiss Saber in irritation. Elsewhere, the king and Darnik discuss the historic figures they have summoned as servants for their cause, with only one yet to appear, the infamous assassin who haunted England, Jack the Ripper. Darnik reassures the king, advising patience, as the assassin will join them soon. Necromancer and his servant, Mordred, arrive at the church to meet the priest, Master Shiro Kodamine. After introductions, their servants reveal themselves, and Mordred, sensing tension, instinctively summons her sword, prepared for a fight. To prevent conflict, Necromancer orders her to keep it sheathed. The two masters sit to discuss their mutual adversary, Darnik, uncovering a dark plot. Darnik and the king intend to summon Vlad III, a powerful vampire, as a servant. Shiro then invites Necromancer to join him in monitoring the other masters, but Necromancer, not one for alliances, declines and departs. As they leave, Mordred questions his refusal to work with Shiro, and Necromancer hints at distrust. Mordred respects his independence, and they continue on their way. Back at the church, Shiro advises his servant to remain composed and work cooperatively with the other masters, postponing their quest for the Grail. During this conversation, another master barges in, complaining that his servant Spartacus, or Berserker of the Red, wandered off to hunt. In the forest, Berserker Spartacus disrupts a hunter, whose fear is evident as he's overwhelmed by Spartacus's sheer size. Later that night, Necromancer and Mordred venture through enemy territory, eager for a confrontation. A few adversaries attempt to block their path, and Mordred quickly showcases her power, eliminating them instantly. Necromancer steps in briefly, assisting her before commending her fighting skills. They press deeper into hostile grounds. Meanwhile, Shiro arrives in a shadowy place and summons Karna, the Lancer servant and son of the sun god Surya, intending to use him to eliminate a powerful ruler who could interfere with his plans. It's clear that Shiro harbors his own secret ambitions to seize control of the Grail once the Holy Grail War concludes. Meanwhile, in the castle's laboratory, one of the humanoid creations, a homunculus, suddenly awakens in his breeding tank. The homunculi are genetically engineered humans, created solely to supply magic to the servants on the battlefield. But this homunculus has witnessed the horrifying treatment inflicted on his kind. Driven by a desire to escape, he musters the strength to break free from his tank and stumbles weakly through the castle's corridors until Astolfo finds him. Moved by compassion, she decides to help him hide from his captors. Not long after, Darnik's servant, Castor, and a young boy discover the empty tank and wonder about the homunculus's whereabouts. Astolfo takes the weakened homunculus to her room and seeks Archer's assistance. Archer examines the homunculus and warns that his frail body may only last another 3 years. Despite this, Astolfo remains determined to protect him. Elsewhere, Shiro meets with his followers to announce that he has dispatched Karna to confront and eliminate the ruler who recently arrived. At that same moment, Karna intercepts Jeanne d'Arc, the blonde woman from earlier, on her path and challenges her to a duel. Just as he prepares to strike, Gords and his servant, Saber of the Black, appear to aid the ruler. Gords, impulsive as ever, attempts to win the ruler's admiration, eager to prove himself to those uninterested in his powers. With formal introductions, Saber and Karna launch into a fierce battle, each demonstrating their formidable skills. A glimpse into Saber's past reveals a life once dedicated to fulfilling the wishes of the people. He was a hero, an obedient figure, who granted others' desires without hesitation. Tragically, his own country eventually wished for his death, and he obeyed, ending his life without discovering his own purpose. Now he charges at Karna with fierce determination, locked in battle. Meanwhile, Gordes, frantic and desperate, pleads with the ruler for assistance, but she declines, choosing not to interfere. As dawn breaks, Karna withdraws, mindful that the sunlight could weaken Gordes' power. Saber, appreciative of Karna's consideration, allows him to retreat. Gordes then invites the ruler to accompany them to Darnik's castle, but she declines, opting to head to Trifas instead. Elsewhere, the young homunculus wakes from a nightmare to find Astolfo by his side. Archer appears and introduces himself as Chiron, while Astolfo reveals herself as Rider. Chiron wastes no time informing the homunculus of his limited lifespan. Only 3 years remain for him. The homunculus is deeply shaken by this revelation, realizing that he has little time to make an impact. Archer and Astolfo leave him to process this difficult truth. In the castle courtyard, the Berserker of Black, Frankenstein, meets with her master, who recounts her tragic past. Frankenstein, a being stitched together from body parts, once yearned for a companion. Denied this by her creator, she ended her life in self-immolation, only to be reborn years later. Reflecting on her past, she asks her master about his own desires in this war. He tells her his wish is to protect his sister. In a silent gesture of understanding, Frankenstein offers him a flower. Nearby, Fiore and her servant Archer discuss their own aspirations. Archer expresses a wish to regain his immortality, while Fiore simply hopes to stand on her own 2 feet. Meanwhile, Necromancer and Mordred are seen in a building near the graveyard, debating about venturing outside. Their conversation is interrupted by a magical message from Shiro, informing them that Berserker Spartacus is rampaging toward Darnik's castle. Berserker of Red, Spartacus, is on a rampage, enjoying the thrill of knocking down anything in his path. Not far away, 2 Red faction servants, Achilles, Rider of the Red, and his sister Atlanta, Archer of the Red, observe him, discussing how best to handle the situation. Atlanta complains to Achilles about not having met her master since her summoning days ago. Achilles explains that their masters prefer to remain hidden, advising her not to dwell on it. During their conversation, another figure joins the fight. At the entrance to Darnik's castle, Darnik, the king, and several of their servants and masters gather to address the Berserker threat. Meanwhile, the homunculus Astolfo, rescued, struggles to regain his strength, attempting to stand and walk. Astolfo steps forward to face Spartacus, slicing off one of his legs. Berserker charges at her, but she manages to pin him to the ground. Soon the king and his group join the fray, ultimately putting an end to the Berserker of Red. Once the battle concludes, they prepare to leave. Taking advantage of the distraction, Astolfo hurries back to the castle, hoping to sneak the homunculus out unnoticed. Meanwhile, Saber and the Berserker of Black face off against Achilles. Achilles relishes the battle, testing the strengths and limits of his opponents. He eventually calls Atlanta into the fight, and she fires an arrow at Saber, taking him out of the action. With Saber temporarily incapacitated, Berserker unleashes her magic, bracing herself for a duel with Achilles. Watching from a distance, Gords becomes increasingly frustrated with Saber, forcing him to tap into a forbidden power just to gain the upper hand against 2 enemies. Thankfully, Castor arrives just in time to prevent him from violating the rules. Gordas reluctantly dispels Saber, leaving Berserker to confront the 2 adversaries alone. Fortunately for her, Darnik's archer has already locked onto Achilles, helping her fend off Atlanta's arrows as she charges at her brother. Realizing the odds are against him, Achilles summons his horses and decides to retreat for now, biding his time for a future opportunity. Astolfo leads the homunculus boy through a not-so-secret part of the castle, inadvertently exposing their escape attempt to everyone. At that moment, Castor announces Ryder's betrayal, revealing that she has taken the escaped homunculus and is heading toward the woods. The order goes out. Astolfo must be stopped at all costs. After running a short distance, the homunculus boy pauses, questioning the point of his escape, given that he has only a few years to live. Astolfo encourages him, urging him to live freely and without regret. Suddenly, golems rise from the ground, blocking their path, ready to confront Ryder. Soon, Saber and Gordas join the fight to prevent their escape. Astolfo engages Saber in combat, urging the homunculus to flee as fast as he can. However, Gords quickly catches up and throws him off balance. Just as Gords is about to capture him, the homunculus boy finds a newfound will to live, summoning his magic powers to strike back. Gords deflects the attack and knocks him to the ground. Pinned against a tree, Astolfo speaks to Saber, appealing to his sense of honor and asking him to help the boy live a life worth remembering. Moved, Saber confronts Gordas, offering him a chance to change sides and support the boy. Gordes, however, dismisses Saber's plea with more callous words, frustrating Saber. At that moment, the ruler's servant arrives, ready to intervene. In an act of unimaginable kindness, Saber apologizes for any harm caused to the boy, then reaches into his own chest, removing his heart, which he gives to the homunculus. The ruler, Jeanne d'Arc, is shocked by this unexpected gesture of self-sacrifice. With little time remaining in his second life, Saber asks the ruler to ensure the boy lives a fulfilling life. As Saber fades away, he thanks everyone for helping him rediscover his purpose. The homunculus boy, revived by the new heart, awakens to life once more. Jeanne d'Arc solemnly vows to protect him from any harm that might come his way. Before awakening, the homunculus boy dreams of encountering a dragon who imprints a mark on his hand, signaling his new role as a master. He then wakes to see Jeanne d'Arc and Astolfo beside him. Astolfo is overjoyed, while Jeanne checks the functionality of his new heart. Once she confirms it's working well, she explains everything, from Saber's sacrifice in giving him a heart to his revival. Moments later, the king, Darnik, and others arrive. Astolfo stands between them and the boy, prepared to defend him. Gordes, now awake, apologizes for his earlier failures. The king demands the boy surrender to them for continued experiments, but Jeanne d'Arc intervenes, introducing herself as the ruler assigned to oversee the Holy Grail War. She firmly declares that the boy is now under her protection and refuses to relinquish him. Though the king tries to negotiate, Jeanne remains steadfast, honoring her promise to Saber. Reluctantly, the king backs down but questions Astolfo's loyalty, accusing her of treason. Astolfo responds resolutely, affirming that she has no regrets for her actions. Following orders, Castor captures Astolfo, while the king invites Jeanne to join his cause. She declines, reminding him of her neutrality. Bound, Astolfo advises the boy to live fully, embracing his second chance. After the king and his followers depart, Jeanne leads the boy to safety. Meanwhile, across the world, Shiro and his covert team learn of Spartacus's capture. They speculate that the berserker's sudden rebellion might have stemmed from his master's actions, but end the meeting without a clear conclusion. Elsewhere, Astolfo's master punishes her for betrayal, caring more for the homunculus than the clan. She binds Astolfo in a dungeon, leaving her alone to contemplate her actions. After she leaves, Archer appears to Astolfo, who expresses concern for the boy's well-being. Archer reassures her, affirming that the boy is safe under the ruler's protection. After trekking through the woods for miles, Jeanne d'Arc, the ruler, and the homunculus boy pause for a brief conversation. The boy shows Jeanne the sword Astolfo gave him, unsure of what to do with it. Jeanne reassures him that it's his to keep, a gift from his rescuer. Still carrying a somber expression, he continues their journey. Jeanne, troubled by a recurring vision of the boy, decides to help him further. She suggests he choose a name for himself. The boy, inspired by the saber hero who gave him life, chooses the name Siegfried, or Sieg for short. Jeanne approves of the name and formally introduces herself. Wanting to teach him how to live, she starts with the basics, giving Sieg food and teaching him how to eat. Meanwhile, back at the Igdmalenia castle, Darnik and the king discuss Astolfo's betrayal. The king decides to overlook it for now, as their primary concern is the assassin, Jack the Ripper, who has apparently killed her own master. Just then, they receive an urgent message and turn their attention to it. Elsewhere, in a secluded part of Igdmalenia's territory, Jack the Ripper and her new master, a woman she calls Mom, share a comforting moment before resting, preparing for the challenges that lie ahead. On their journey, Jeanne and Sieg stop at a cliff's edge. Sieg, curious, asks Jeanne why she feels hunger, noting that servants typically don't require food. Jeanne explains that she's not truly a servant, but is temporarily borrowing a body to complete her mission. She mentions that her unusual summoning hints at a deeper issue within the Holy Grail War. Sieg reflects, adding that his own escape from captivity could be another anomaly, but Jeanne encourages him to make the most of his life now that he has it. With a sigh, Sieg resumes the journey. In the meantime, Gordes, frustrated by his own failings with Saber, drinks heavily, throwing tantrums over his perceived incompetence. Nearby, Berserker of Black and her master are deep in conversation when Fiore passes by to announce that Jack the Ripper has been located. Jeanne eventually takes Sieg to a farmhouse and persuades the farmer to let Sieg stay with him. After securing Sieg's place there, she prepares to leave. Before parting, Sieg hesitantly asks if he'll ever see Jeanne again. Jeanne reassures him that they will cross paths once more, though she silently knows their next meeting might be on the battlefield. Mordred is convinced of her rightful claim to the throne of England, but Arthur denied her that destiny, believing she lacked the virtues required of a king. Arthur Pendragon confronts Mordred on the battlefield after dispatching their enemies. Mordred charges at Arthur, only to be struck down and killed. This confrontation with the king took place years ago, when Mordred was still an ordinary commoner. One day, as Arthur returned from a conquest, Mordred concealed herself among the crowd to watch him. During this, a mysterious woman appeared, informing Mordred that royal blood coursed through her veins. From that moment, Mordred decided to serve Arthur as one of his knights, dedicating her life to him. Her life as a knight proceeded smoothly until she was assigned to execute a traitor. When Mordred asked the traitor why he betrayed the kingdom, he responded that it was because the king was too perfect. After carrying out the execution, the same eerie woman Mordred calls Mother reappeared, reminding her to reveal her true lineage to Arthur and claim her birthright. Driven by this, Mordred approached the palace and demanded that Arthur recognize her as his rightful heir. However, Arthur refused, seeing no daughter in Mordred. Enraged, Mordred cursed him, vowing to be his end. At that moment, Necromancer awakens, annoyed, asking Mordred to stop projecting her past life into his dreams. Mordred questions what he means, but Necromancer brushes it off and begins his day. Later, while eating breakfast at an outdoor cafe, he receives a call from Lord El Malloy regarding a series of gruesome murders plaguing Trifus. El Malloy reports that several Magi stationed in the town have been killed, their souls drained, a troubling pattern even disturbing ordinary residents. It's clear this is not the work of Igdmalenia, who would avoid exposing the mage world to humans. Necromancer accepts the task of investigating the murders and uncovering the identity of this third-party killer. Meanwhile, In a jealous rage over Astolfo's concern for Sieg, Ryder's master gruesomely dismembers several homunculi, unable to bear the attention Astolfo lavished on the boy. Elsewhere, Darnik and his king strategize over a game of chess, aiming to protect their core from a devastating attack. Their plan involves using Avonbryce's noble phantasm to project a defensive reflection of their homunculi core. A noble phantasm is a hero's unique, powerful ability, and activating it requires an immense amount of magic energy. To fuel this, they consider sacrificing a top-tier mage, with Gordes emerging as their prime candidate. Meanwhile, Berserker's master momentarily steps away to assist his sister in fighting off assassins targeting the Magi. He promises to summon Berserker if things go awry, and with a nod, Berserker agrees. Following a brief investigation, Necromancer catches up with a restless Mordred, informing her of his findings. The autopsy of the slain Magi reveals that, beyond draining their souls, the killer harvested their hearts to consume and replenish magical energy. Now, as the last mages remaining in Trifes, Necromancer and Mordred prepare for the night, ready to confront the lurking assassin. As darkness settles, Jack the Ripper prepares for her next strike. First, she disguises herself as Shiro's servant, consulting with him briefly before setting out on her mission. Later, Necromancer and Mordred wait in a Trifes alleyway when a cloud of poison gas suddenly envelops them, causing Necromancer to collapse. Mordred quickly carries him to a safer spot and stands guard. Moments later, Jack the Ripper attempts a surprise attack on Necromancer from behind, but Mordred intercepts her, initiating a confrontation. Jack releases another poisonous mist, but Mordred, clad in full armor, activates her red thunder to disperse the haze, allowing her to see Jack clearly. Their clash continues until an arrow from Fiore's archer interrupts the fight. Fiore, using mechanical spider-like legs to overcome her disability, moves closer to engage Necromancer. Sensing Archer's position, Mordred abandons her fight with Jack and charges toward Archer. Ready, Archer strikes, injuring Mordred as she closes in. Meanwhile, Necromancer faces Fiore, who warns him about trespassing on Igd Millennia's land. Ignoring her warning, Necromancer launches an attack, which Fiore skillfully counters, pinning him down. Drawing on his extensive combat experience, Necromancer manages to break free, launching his own offensive against Fiore in their intense standoff. After trapping Fiore, Necromancer prepares to deliver a final blow. Just as he's about to strike, Fiore's brother, calls for Veg Igd Millennia, intervenes, blocking the attack and cornering Necromancer instead. Necromancer, seeking a fair fight, proposes a one-on-one duel. When he realizes he won't get a fair match, he resorts to underhanded tactics. Meanwhile, Archer, who believes he has Mordred cornered, suddenly realizes he's actually fallen into her trap. He urgently sends a telepathic message to Fiore, advising her to retreat while they still have the chance. Fiore agrees, and they retreat with the other servants, including the assassin. After regrouping, Necromancer reunites with Mordred, and together they break into a car to make their way back to Trifes. At the designated meeting spot, Fiore reprimands her brother, Calls, for his impulsive decision to rescue her. She believes his actions were reckless and inappropriate for a master, emphasizing the importance of following Darnik's strategy. While she acknowledges that his intervention helped, she stresses that risking two masters for her survival isn't justified. Meanwhile, Shiro's servant reverts to her true form, the Assassin of Black, Jack the Ripper, and returns to her master. Her master tends to her injuries and gives her the last of the harvested mage hearts to eat, allowing her to heal. With their supply now depleted, the pair decide to return to Trifas to claim more hearts from the Magi in the area. The next morning, Jeanne d'Arc, in disguise as a human, begins her search for the church in Trifas. Using a locator spell, she traces its location and heads there. Meanwhile, Sieg, at the barn where he's staying, receives a morning coffee from the farmer after breakfast. Curious, Sieg asks the farmer what he thinks about freedom. The farmer explains that, although many people believe they are free, they are always bound by constraints that hold them back in life. He suggests that all one can do is live in the best way possible. Confused by the farmer's words, Sieg continues to ponder them as the farmer leaves him to his thoughts. Jeanne enters the church, but as soon as she steps inside, she's ensnared by traps set near the entrance. She quickly breaks free and experiences a disturbing vision involving Shiro, the priest. In the following scene, Shiro wakes up from a nightmare of a battlefield strewn with flames and corpses, only to find the assassin, Jack the Ripper, nearby. Unnerved, he makes her promise never to frighten him like that again. Elsewhere, Darnik informs the king of an unusual influx of artifacts entering the country. Suspecting that the Red faction is preparing for war, the king urges Darnik to ensure their forces are ready for any incoming attack. Shiro calls Lancer and his master to discuss their next battle strategy. Lancer's master makes it clear he has no intention of actively fighting in the war. Instead, he plans to simply observe and record the events. Shiro's servant warns them not to underestimate their strength, revealing that they possess artifacts potent enough to even intimidate the ruler herself. Just outside their lair, Jeanne rushes to intercept them, But in that moment, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon rise from the ground, transforming into a massive floating fortress. Shiro and his allies prepare for battle as the fortress sets course for Igdmalenia's castle. A few hours later, Sieg awakens, questioning his purpose in life. Meanwhile, Jean pursues the floating fortress as it moves toward Darnik's territory. En route, Shiro and the Red Faction release a zombie army to act as ground forces, adding to their menacing approach. In Igdmalenia's castle, Darnik, the king, and their allies spot the approaching threat and mobilize for defense. The king issues commands to his servants, instructing Archer to take charge of the homunculus army. Astolfo, meanwhile, is to unleash her noble phantasm to demonstrate her full power. As the king assembles his other servants, he readies them to face the oncoming assault. Finally, Sieg, after reflecting on his purpose, decides to set out on his own path. He expresses his gratitude to the farmer, who gifts him a belt and wishes him well on his journey. Just before the battle between the Red Faction and Igdmalenia begins, the king of the Igdmalenia clan reveals his true identity as Vlad III, the legendary vampire feared throughout history. Although believed long dead, Vlad had been hiding in plain sight as the ruler of the clan. Faced with the looming battle, he now unleashes his full power to confront their powerful enemies. The battlefield is swarming with Red Faction's zombie army, mindlessly charging toward Igdmalenia's castle. Atlanta, Archer of the Red Faction, fires glowing arrows at the Igdmalenia forces, but Berserker of Black intercepts, preventing heavy losses. Soon, other warriors join the fray, demonstrating their unique powers. Meanwhile, Shiro and Karna observe from the floating fortress, monitoring the war's progress. Shiro catches sight of Jean, the ruler, approaching the battlefield, and he grows uneasy, uncertain if she'll intervene. Vlad finally enters the battlefield, unleashing his vampire powers to decimate the zombie army. Once cleared, he turns his attention to Karna, the Lancer of Red, exchanging a few words before engaging in combat. Atlanta attempts to intervene to support Karna, but Vlad swiftly throws her off balance, resuming his fierce assault. During the clash, Vlad manages to pin Karna down, preparing a decisive blow. However, Karna counters with his hellish flames, burning through Vlad's restraint. Impressed by Karna's resilience, Vlad warns that he'll soon exhaust his magic reserves. The intense battle continues, with Lancer parrying Vlad's relentless attacks. Elsewhere, Achilles charges onto the battlefield, confronting Castor and his golem, swiftly defeating them and clearing the path of enemy soldiers. Calling out Igdmalenia's champions, Archer launches a volley of arrows, forcing Achilles to dash into the woods. There, he finds Archer waiting on a tree branch, and he lunges for an attack, only to be struck at his Achilles' heel, his sole vulnerability. Shocked that Archer knows his weakness, Achilles recalls the Centurion Guardian who once cared for him and revealed the secret of his only mortal spot. As Achilles ponders how Archer could have known his vulnerability, Archer fires another arrow. This time, Achilles dodges and demands to know why Archer would target him. Archer responds that he has no choice. It's a fight to the death, and if Achilles doesn't take it seriously, he risks dying once again. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Sieg tends to wounded homunculi, bandaging their injuries. When one of them asks why he's helping, Sieg reveals his desire to free his kind from the oppressive control of the Igdmalenia clan. On the floating fortress, Shiro steps onto a balcony, feeling the urge to join the battle. His servant, the assassin, questions his decision, pointing out his prestigious position. Shiro explains that he wants to test whether his creator truly supports his actions. After hearing this, the assassin grants him her power, and Shiro, expressing his gratitude, heads to the battlefield. Meanwhile, Necromancer and Mordred race toward the battlefield, eager to join the fray. In the midst of the chaos, Berserker of Black successfully clears her area of zombies. Astolfo, riding her flying mount, heads toward the floating fortress, aiming to infiltrate it. Spotting her approach, Shiro's servant dispatches a swarm of flying zombies to intercept her. Sieg, seizing the opportunity created by the weakened castle defenses, leads one of the homunculi he treated inside to help free the others still imprisoned. At the same time, Castor revives Spartacus, the Berserker of Red, and persuades him to fight once more. Driven by his own chaotic nature, Spartacus charges onto the battlefield, heedless of the danger around him. In the final scene, Berserker of Black, Frankenstein, encounters Shiro in the woods, setting the stage for an intense confrontation. Darnik reflects on his past and how he became the keeper of the Greater Grail for over 50 years. He recalls how he journeyed to Japan to participate in the Holy Grail War, determined to claim the Grail. Aligning himself with the Germans, he used their resources to steal the artifact, only to betray them once he was within reach of victory, securing the Grail for himself and the Igdmalenia clan. Now, as he faces another war over the Grail, Darnik vows to defend his prized relic with his life. Meanwhile, in the woods, Shiro engages in a fierce battle with Frankenstein, attempting to persuade her to join his side. Unmoved, Frankenstein remains loyal to Ig Millennia. Caster from the Red faction arrives, observing and documenting the fight between Shiro and Frankenstein. Growing serious, Shiro unveils his noble phantasm, a powerful lightning sword. Frankenstein, showing no signs of retreat, charges at him with relentless determination. Elsewhere, Jeanne d'Arc senses the intense battle between Shiro and Frankenstein and realizes this confirms the presence of another Red faction master on the floating fortress. With a surge of resolve, she pushes through the mass of zombies, making her way toward the fortress to confront this master. Astolfo, also in pursuit of the fortress, continues to dispatch the flying zombies blocking her path. Frustrated, she takes out La Black Luna, her massive horn, blowing the zombies out of existence with one powerful blast. With her path cleared, she sets her sights on the floating fortress, prepared to close the distance and join the fray. Vlad III and Karna, Lancer of the Red faction, continue their fierce clash on the battlefield until Spartacus charges in, interrupting their fight. Karna steps back, leaving Spartacus to Atlanta, who attempts to take him down with arrows. However, Spartacus's body continuously regenerates. Frustrated, Atlanta uses her most powerful arrow, shredding Spartacus into pieces, only to watch him regenerate yet again. Meanwhile, Achilles finds himself at a disadvantage against Chiron. Chiron lands a heavy blow to Achilles' stomach, confidently stating that he's well-versed in all of Achilles' moves. Achilles grins, changing his technique in a way Chiron hadn't expected. Though surprised, Chiron still manages to dodge the attacks unscathed. Back at the castle, Sieg reaches the laboratories and begins freeing the imprisoned homunculi. At the same time, Astolfo finally confronts the Assassin of Red, challenging her to a battle. Assassin of Red harnesses the power of the floating fortress, launching a powerful strike that shoots Astolfo out of the sky. Sieg, escorting the freed homunculi to safety, spots Astolfo plummeting to the ground. Requesting permission from his comrades, he races to save her. Astolfo regains consciousness after a rough landing, disoriented but still intact. Before she can fully assess her situation, Mordred and her master, Necromancer, arrive at the battlefield, skidding their car to a halt right in front of her. Recognizing Astolfo immediately, Necromancer decides to stay out of the fight and lets Mordred step forward to engage Astolfo in her first battle. The assassin of the Red faction spots Jeanne, the ruler, swiftly approaching Shiro's location. In a bid to prevent her from reaching him, she launches a series of attacks and warns Shiro to retreat before it's too late. Heeding the warning, Shiro begins his withdrawal toward the safety of the floating fortress. However, Frankenstein remains hot on his trail, determined not to let him escape. To shake her off, Shiro instructs his caster to intervene. Caster casts a spell that sends Frankenstein into a haunting trance, causing her to relive memories of her former master, who for the first time acknowledges her worth. But Frankenstein, resilient as ever, refuses to succumb to the illusion. She forces herself out of the spell, releasing a sorrowful cry that echoes until her current master calms her. Meanwhile, Mordred engages Astolfo in combat, taunting her by mocking Siegfried, the saber of the Black faction, who sacrificed himself for a mere boy. The tactic works, as Astolfo, emotionally stirred, allowing Mordred to land a hit. The Assassin of Red continues her assault on Jeanne, but Jeanne deflects the attacks, pressing forward toward the fortress undeterred. Shiro, realizing the threat, directs Atlanta to lure Spartacus toward Jeanne, hoping that his wild and destructive nature will stop her advance and keep her from reaching the floating stronghold. Sieg reaches Astolfo just in time to stop Mordred from delivering a fatal blow. Taking up the fight himself, he diverts Mordred's attention away from his injured friend, only for Mordred to overpower him and knock him down. Despite her weakened state, Astolfo summons every bit of strength she has left to hold Mordred at bay, hoping Sieg can escape her deadly sword. Yet Sieg refuses to abandon her, determined to protect Astolfo at any cost. In that intense moment, Frankenstein joins the fray, preparing herself for a final, self-sacrificial attack. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the battlefield, Jack the Ripper finishes slashing through several homunculus magi and readies to harvest their hearts. Her master, Mom, calls her back. Ignoring the call, she heads in the opposite direction, drawn to the fierce energy nearby. Back on the battlefield, Calls exhausts his magic while watching Frankenstein bravely confront Mordred. Mordred, enraged, activates her Red Thunder power. Though Frankenstein dodges most of the onslaught, her hand is severed in the chaos. Mordred approaches the now immobilized Frankenstein and without hesitation drives her sword into her. Sieg rushes toward Mordred, attempting to hold her down, but she kicks him away, staring him down from her armored height. She questions his determination, wondering why he insists on facing her. Sieg declares he will do whatever it takes to save Astolfo, his rescuer who freed him from slavery. With that, he launches a feeble thrust toward Mordred, which she easily dodges, then retaliates by driving her sword through Sieg's heart. Astolfo cries out in despair and charges at Mordred, intent on avenging Sieg. Mordred deflects Astolfo, preparing to deliver a finishing blow, but before she can strike, Necromancer calls her attention to the fact that Berserker, Frankenstein, is nowhere to be seen. Mordred turns, only to find Frankenstein reappearing from behind, attaching herself to Mordred in a final act of self-sacrifice. Calls channels the last of his mana to support her. The resulting explosion is so immense that even Astolfo has to retreat to avoid the blast. As the smoke clears, Astolfo cautiously approaches, only to see Mordred still standing, her armor barely scratched from the impact. Frankenstein's ultimate sacrifice had only managed to damage Mordred's armor. At that moment, Sieg, lying on the ground, drifts into a trance where he experiences the life of the real Siegfried. He meets the hero himself, who imparts to Sieg a sense of duty and heroism, urging him to be a true hero to the end. Emerging from this encounter, Sieg feels strengthened. Suddenly, he finds himself before a stone-embedded sword, with a dragon watching him. Siegfried encourages him to draw the sword. Using every ounce of his will, Sieg pulls the sword free, revitalizing his heart and resurrecting him on the battlefield as the true saber of the Black faction, Siegfried. Mordred, stunned, can barely believe her eyes as she watches the once homunculus boy transform into Siegfried. Undeterred, she readies herself for battle, exchanging brief words with Sieg before charging at him, prepared to face him in a clash between heroes. Back in the floating fortress, Shiro, the Red Caster, and the assassin all wonder how the Saber of Black got revived into a weakling homunculus's body. Shiro gets frustrated a little bit and lets his people know that Siegfried isn't going to live long in that weakling's body. Still, he appreciates the homunculus boy for trying his best and waits to watch what will happen. Mordred speaks to her master, asking him to enhance her powers with his mana. Necromancer complies with her wishes and grants her some part of his power via a command spell. She launches herself towards Siegfried to attack him. Siegfried blocks her attack and creates a large attack to counter hers. Jean races toward the floating fortress but encounters the archer of the Red faction, Atlanta, who stalls her long enough for Spartacus to arrive. Leaving Jean in Spartacus's hands, Atlanta withdraws. Meanwhile, the sabers of both factions, Mordred and Siegfried, regroup after their initial clash, preparing for a renewed round of combat. Nearby, Vlad and Lancer continue their fierce exchange of blows until they decide to take a brief pause, exchanging words about their differing ideals. Lancer questions Vlad's ambitions, mocking his goal to build a nation, suggesting his people lack the commitment Vlad hopes for. Unfazed by Lancer's taunts, Vlad activates his noble phantasm, impaling Karna and pinning him down. Just as Vlad prepares to finish him, Karna counters with O Agni, a powerful fire spell that burns through Vlad's constraints, allowing him to rise for a counterattack. Spartacus, meanwhile, takes advantage of the battlefield chaos by allowing zombies to attack him, drawing strength from their inflicted wounds. Jean watches in shock as Spartacus absorbs power from his injuries, growing even stronger. Even the assassin, observing from the floating fortress, is repulsed by Spartacus's gruesome transformation. Fully powered up, Spartacus charges at Jean, who skillfully dodges his attacks. Back on the battlefield, Mordred's frustration mounts as Siegfried continuously blocks her strikes. Eventually, Siegfried reaches his limit and collapses, and Mordred celebrates, believing the fight is hers. Unbeknownst to her, Spartacus rolls toward her at high speed. With swift precision, Mordred braces and slices Spartacus in half in one powerful swing. Sensing the danger, Necromancer warns Mordred to leave the battlefield at once. On the ground, Jean finally catches up to Astolfo and Sieg, scolding them for recklessly challenging a foe beyond their strength. Astolfo explains their situation, and Jean decides to aid them. She activates her noble phantasm, a glowing sword that radiates a protective barrier, shielding them from Spartacus's attacks. As the first wave of his assault subsides, Astolfo and Sieg breathe a sigh of relief, grateful to be alive and protected by Jean's unwavering resolve. Vlad and Karna continue their intense battle, locked in a stalemate. Eventually, Karna pauses the fight and retreats to consult with his master. Puzzled, Vlad wonders about the sudden shift until he receives alarming news. Red Faction's floating fortress is drilling deep beneath the castle, attempting to unearth and steal the Greater Grail. Realizing the threat, Darnik, who has safeguarded Ygd Millennia for decades, swears to protect his kingdom and the Grail at any cost. He gathers Vlad and the remaining masters and servants, leading a daring infiltration into the floating fortress to dismantle it from within. Inside, they encounter Karna and his masters, who have returned to prevent Ygd Millennia's forces from advancing any further. The battle resumes, and once again, Karna manages to corner Vlad, putting him on the defensive. This time, Karna's relentless assault pushes Vlad to his limits. Vlad notices his movements are slower and his strength diminished. The floating fortress, controlled by Red Faction, weakens his power by sapping the influence he holds in his own territory. Amid the struggle, Vlad recalls a conversation with Darnik weeks before the war, where he revealed a powerful yet dangerous noble phantasm, an ability he had sworn never to use. Vlad had once made Darnik promise to stop him if circumstances forced him to unleash it. Now, however, with the Greater Grail at stake, Darnik faces a grim choice. Despite the risks, he realizes he has no other option but to compel Vlad to use his ultimate power if they are to prevent Red Faction from seizing the Grail. Shiro stands outside his church, reflecting on the events of the past Holy Grail War. Memories flood back, including his first encounter with Darnik and the painful losses he suffered. Grateful for the power he has gained since then, he now prays that the heavens favor him in this new war. Meanwhile, the assassin of the Red Faction monitors the OLED screen, keeping an eye on the battlefield's developments. Deep within the floating fortress, Vlad continues his struggle with Karna. With each strike, Vlad feels his strength waning, as Karna points out that the conditions within the fortress put Vlad at a severe disadvantage. Karna even offers him a chance to withdraw, but Vlad's pride refuses to let him abandon the fight. He presses on, only to be cornered once again. Karna charges his lance, preparing for a finishing blow, but just then, Darnik arrives and urges Vlad to use his noble phantasm. Vlad hesitates, as his noble phantasm forces him into the form of Dracula, the vampire, a persona he vowed never to assume again. Desperate to save the Grail, Darnik overrides Vlad's will, using magic to force him into the vampire transformation. As Vlad morphs into Dracula, he makes a last attempt to resist Darnik's influence, even trying to kill him. In his final act, Darnik transfers his consciousness into Vlad's body, seizing control. Vlad struggles to regain control, but Darnik ultimately dominates, fully taking over Vlad's vampire form. Achilles is the first to confront the transformed Vlad, but he's quickly pinned down by Darnik. Just as Darnik is about to drink his blood, Chiron intervenes, pushing Achilles to safety. Now fully transformed, Darnik turns 3 Red Faction guards into vampires, who in turn begin spreading the infection to the other soldiers. Chiron warns Achilles that, despite his near invincibility, even he could fall victim to Darnik's vampire bite, which would make him a threat to their own side. Darnik shifts his attention to the larger servants and their masters, yet each of them defends against his relentless attacks, unwilling to let him spread his vampiric influence further. The battlefield becomes a chaotic blend of swordplay, magic, and desperate resistance as Darnik, wielding Vlad's full vampiric power, attempts to overcome his enemies. Back in Igdamalenia's castle, Calls and his sister Fiore gather to assess the situation, now that their leaders are fully engaged in battle. Gordy soon joins them, seeking updates on the ongoing war. Their young assistant Roche arrives, reassuring them that the labs remain intact. Recognizing the need to defend and maintain the castle, Fiore assigns Roche the task of mobilizing golems to repair any damaged areas. Gordis is instructed to contact their extended family for reinforcements, while Calls is tasked with gathering any surviving golems and homunculi from the battlefield. With roles assigned, they each rush off to fulfill their duties. On the floating fortress, Jean calls for a temporary truce among the servants, urging them to unite against the vampiric Darnik. The servants agree, joining forces to face the powerful vampire. Undeterred, Darnik battles his growing number of opponents, fighting relentlessly. At one point, Karna unleashes his hellfire, pinning Darnik with searing flames. Just as Karna is poised to land a decisive blow, Shiro and the assassin intervene, restricting any support for the Black Faction. Using this distraction, Darnik manages to escape from Karna's hold, intent on finding the Grail. Jean and Chiron pursue him. Along the way, they encounter automated defenses within the fortress. Chiron stays back to dismantle the defenses, allowing Jean to continue chasing after Darnik. Darnik eventually reaches the church within the fortress, only to find himself trapped at the entrance, where he encounters Shiro, his longtime adversary. Darnik, filled with anger and disbelief, recalls how Shiro should have perished long ago. Smiling, Shiro assures him he is very much alive. While calmly speaking, Shiro brandishes his holy swords, stabbing Darnik repeatedly. Darnik's screams fill the chamber as Shiro methodically burns him to ashes. Jean arrives just in time to witness the horrifying scene. Stunned, she demands to know Shiro's true identity. Shiro reveals himself as the first servant of the ruler faction. Shocked further, Jean questions his motives, pointing out that it's forbidden for rulers to interfere directly in the war. Shiro responds, asserting that his actions are part of a greater mission, to save humanity from total ruin. After the chaos subsides, Astolfo scolds Sieg for risking his life to protect her. Sieg responds that he couldn't stand by and watch his people face destruction, vowing to keep fighting until his kind is free and safe. Astolfo admires his determination, calling him a cool guy, and pledging her loyalty to support him when the time comes. As they talk, her eccentric master, the one with the habit of licking her, arrives on the battlefield with intentions clearly set on causing trouble. Meanwhile, Jean continues her interrogation of Shiro aboard the floating fortress, demanding to know his true motives. Shiro asserts that his goal is solely to save humanity from its self-destructive tendencies. Jean reminds him that, as a ruler, it's forbidden to interfere directly with humans. Such intervention defies the rules and could bring punishment from the creator. Dismissing her warnings, Shiro declares he's had enough of humanity's repeated mistakes and is determined to take action to correct them, regardless of the consequences. When Jin questions the fate of the Red Masters, Shiro coldly reveals that he ended them, as they had already served their purpose. At that moment, Semiramis, the assassin of Red, joins the exchange. Soon, the other servants of the Red faction gather in the church, curious about the commotion. Shiro informs them that he forced the Red Masters to relinquish their command spells, effectively transferring control of their servants to him. Achilles attempts to strike Shiro, but Karna, Lancer of Red, intercepts, defending Shiro. The other servants are shocked by Lancer's decision, but Karna clarifies that he isn't choosing sides. He's merely upholding the Red faction's unity. With the fragile truce shattered, Shiro incites the Red faction servants to confront the Black faction in a decisive clash. The lines are drawn as both factions prepare for an all-out battle, their alliance is fractured and tensions at an all-time high. Back on the battlefield, Astolfo's master unleashes a tirade of insults aimed at Astolfo's identity as a heroic spirit. Astolfo remains calm and politely deflects the insults, which only fuels her master's anger further. Recognizing the danger, Astolfo urges Sieg to escape. Enraged, her master uses a command spell to immobilize Sieg and forces Astolfo to unsheath her sword, ordering her to strike Sieg. Astolfo, despite her efforts to calm her master, finds nothing seems to work. Just as she begins to despair, Mordred arrives in time and swiftly beheads Astolfo's master, freeing Astolfo from her control. Afterward, Mordred leaves to rejoin Necromancer. With her master gone, Astolfo's essence begins fading back to the other world. Acting quickly, Sieg forms a contract with Astolfo, using his command spell to become her new master, thus anchoring her in the physical world. After securing the contract, Sieg takes his leave, allowing Astolfo to remain by his side. Meanwhile, Shiro, having gathered the strongest servants of both factions in one place, attempts to recruit the Black faction's servants to his team. All agree, save for one, Avisbron, the caster of black. Chiron, feeling betrayed by Avisbron's decision, tries to eliminate him with a well-aimed arrow. However, Semiramis intercepts the attack, ordering Avisbron to eliminate his former allies. Avisbron complies, summoning a wave of golems to surround his former comrades. Mordred, however, swiftly shatters the golems, creating an escape route from the floating fortress for the other servants. Avisbron finalizes his alliance with Shiro on the condition that his master, Roche, remains unharmed. With this promise secured, he switches sides, ready to fight alongside Shiro's faction in the escalating conflict. As they exit the fortress, Jean explains to Kiran that her summoning was meant to prevent Shiro from destabilizing the world by interfering in the Grail War. Meanwhile, Sieg returns to Igmalenia's castle to aid his fellow homunculi injured during the battle. Upon reaching the laboratory, he proposes freeing the remaining homunculi from their tanks. Gortys vehemently opposes this, fearing that without the homunculi, the clan would be left defenseless. He argues that they are essential, dismissing them as mere tools. However, Sieg counters passionately, insisting that the homunculi, who share humanity's essence, deserve freedom rather than being treated as expendable resources. As the debate intensifies, Fiore, who has been listening quietly, receives an urgent message from Chiron about Castor's betrayal. Chiron warns her to keep Roche, Castor's master, safe, as Castor might attempt to use him as the core for his noble phantasm. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Fiore immediately begins to search for Roche, only to learn he is already missing. Unbeknownst to everyone, Roche has ventured to a secluded spot near a river to meet Castor and deliver an important object, unaware of the danger his servants' plans may pose to him. Long ago, a heavily bearded man visited Earth, horrified by humanity's reckless treatment of the planet and its creatures. He wished fervently for the Creator to intervene and save them before it was too late. In the present, Necromancer and Mordred discuss their next steps now that the Red faction has fallen. Sensing Mordred's somber mood, Necromancer teases her about her unexpected decision to save Sieg and Astolfo. Mordred, slightly embarrassed, admits she doesn't fully understand why she acted as she did. The urge to rescue them from their abusive master felt instinctive. Meanwhile, Sieg and the other homunculi are busy clearing debris from the recent attack. Jean, the ruler, arrives to chastise Sieg for getting involved in the fighting instead of staying out of danger. Sieg explains that he couldn't stand by and watch his fellow homunculi suffer under the control of the masters and servants. Jean sighs, understanding his conviction, and realizes she must now consider Sieg as an active participant in the war. Fiore and Gortys, reeling from the news of Darnik's actions on the floating fortress, quickly shift their focus to the imminent threat posed by Castor. Chiron informs them that Castor, or Avisbron, plans to use his own master, Roche, as the core for his noble phantasm, a colossal golem. Near the river, Roche, horrified, pleads with Avisbron to explain his betrayal. Avisbron coldly reveals his long-held contempt for humanity, explaining that he sees this as an opportunity to recreate Eden and cleanse the world. Realizing his pleas are futile, Roche accepts his fate, merging with the golem to serve as its heart. With each step, Adam transforms the ground beneath him into a lush Eden. Avisbron mounts his creation, and together they begin their short but ominous journey toward Igdmalenia's castle, intent on remaking the world in Avisbron's twisted vision of paradise. Astolfo joins her new master, Sieg, on the castle roof to reflect on the recent battle. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted as Avisbron's massive golem, powered by Roche's sacrificed life, approaches the castle, consuming 2 nearby homunculi for additional energy. As the formidable creature looms before them, Sieg and Astolfo are the first to confront it, halting its advance and questioning Avisbron's motives. Avisbron, unmoved, asks for understanding, but Astolfo remains resolute in her intent to destroy him. Suddenly, Chiron launches a volley of arrows, fatally wounding Avisbron. In his final moments, Avisbron imparts one last command to the golem before fading away. With Avisbron gone, the golem, now fully autonomous, becomes even more violent, lashing out at anyone nearby. Astolfo, mounted on her flying steed, attempts an aerial assault, but the golem deflects her attack and sets its sights on Sieg. Just as it closes in, Jean arrives, shielding Sieg from the monstrous blow. Despite the combined efforts of Jean, Sieg, and Astolfo, all attacks prove futile as the golem, immensely powerful, continues its transformation. Observing the situation from afar, Fiore examines the golem's heat map and devises a plan with Archer, Chiron. He explains that to target the golem's heart effectively, he'll require a large reservoir of magical energy. Jean, determined to see it through, summons Mordred and allows Chiron to share his strategy. For the plan to work, Sieg must transform into Siegfried once again, allowing Chiron, Siegfried, and Mordred to coordinate a triple assault, maximizing their power in a single concentrated attack. The force of such a combined strike should be enough to prevent the golem from regenerating. With Jean's reluctant blessing, she bestows command spells upon Sieg and Mordred, enabling Sieg's transformation back into Siegfried. United on the battlefield, Chiron, Siegfried, and Mordred unleash a stunning display of synchronized power and strength. Together, they overwhelm the golem, slicing it apart with precision, leaving it in ruins. The colossal threat is finally neutralized, their combined force prevailing against the primordial entity in a decisive and spectacular victory. On the floating fortress, Shiro instructs Atlanta and Achilles to brace for a possible encounter with Jean, suspecting she may pursue them. Achilles, rather unfazed, first questions Shiro about the fate of their former masters. Shiro admits they're all confined to a room, having been poisoned to prevent them from meddling. Shocked, Achilles confronts Shiro, but Shiro remains unapologetic, insisting that the masters would have done the same to achieve the Greater Grail. Atlanta, however, quickly submits to Shiro's command. Achilles then voices one last concern, asking if Shiro intends to dispose of them as well. Shiro reassures him, claiming he values them deeply. Shiro then inquires about their wishes for the Grail. Achilles reveals his simple desire to live as a hero, while Atlanta wishes for all children to be loved. Semiramis, the assassin of Red, lightly mocks Atlanta's wish, but Shiro cuts her off, respecting Atlanta's heartfelt goal. When it's Karna's turn, he states his wish for a rematch with Siegfried, the Saber of Black. Shiro agrees, promising to fulfill their wishes as part of his plan. As the servants settle, they pose a final question. How does Shiro intend to save mankind? Shiro prepares for an in-depth explanation. Meanwhile, the remaining Igdmalenia leaders convene to discuss their next move. Gortys laughs off Shiro's plan to save the world, dismissing it as absurd. Fiore, now acting as the clan's leader, acknowledges that Shiro possesses the magical ability to realize his vision, especially with the Grail in his grasp. With Necromancer and Mordred having pledged their loyalty to the Black faction, Fiore decides they must strike the floating fortress before Shiro's plans advance further. Recognizing the clan's dwindling resources, she calls for additional reinforcements. Necromancer and Mordred volunteer to support, and Fiore gratefully accepts. After the meeting, Chiron wheels Fiore to her room, sensing something troubling her, but keeping his thoughts private. Later, he meets with her brother, Calls, to discuss Fiore's current state. Concerned that Fiore's emotional vulnerability makes her unfit to lead the clan, Chiron mentions her struggle with loss. Calls shares a memory from their childhood. Fiore had always been resilient, yet she was deeply sensitive to the suffering of animals and people, struggling to cope with death. Understanding her weakness, Calls agrees to speak with Fiore, promising to help her reflect on whether she truly wants to lead Igdmalenia. Grateful, Chiron thanks Calls and departs. That night, Jean grants command spells to the available servants. She gives Mordred a single spell, but bestows 2 to Sieg, whom she considers special. She cautions Sieg not to use the final spell, warning that doing so could trigger a dangerous reaction that might be fatal. When Sieg begins to protest, Jean firmly insists he heed her advice, leaving him with no choice but to agree. Meanwhile, Necromancer shares a rare personal moment with Mordred, opening up about his past. He reveals he is the last of the Sisigo family line. Years ago, when he tried to transfer his family crest to an adopted child, the child tragically died. Since then, Necromancer has grown reluctant about matters of legacy and transferring power. Accepting his fate, he tells Mordred his main goal is to secure the Holy Grail. Mordred asks why they cannot be more open with their allies, but Necromancer explains the need for caution. They must wait patiently, hiding their intentions until the time is right to seize the Grail for themselves. Mordred, appreciating his strategic thinking, agrees. At Igdamalenia's castle, Jean contemplates Sieg's future and well-being as she gazes into a mirror. Meanwhile, Gordes encounters a healing room within the castle, where he finds Sieg and Astolfo tending to injured homunculi. Surprisingly, Gordes offers his assistance, revealing a newfound compassion. When Sieg asks about his change of heart, Gordes explains that he's seeking redemption for his past treatment of his own servant, Siegfried. One of the homunculi stands and bluntly tells Gordes he is impulsive, self-centered, and short-tempered. For the first time, Gordes accepts these flaws and continues his efforts, determined to help the wounded. On the floating fortress, Castor of the Red faction joins his fellow servants on the balcony, enjoying the night breeze. Achilles, curious, asks if Castor had been aware of Shiro's grand plan from the start. Castor confirms this, affirming that he fully supports Shiro's vision to save humanity. Inside, Shiro quietly reaffirms his determination to carry out his mission, steadfast in his belief that he alone can steer humanity toward a better future. It's that time of year again when Jack the Ripper resumes her deadly hunt, this time interrogating a mage for crucial information. She promises to spare him if he cooperates, but after he divulges what she wants, she mercilessly rips out his heart. Meanwhile, Jean, inhabiting her host Letitia, discusses a troubling vision she had recently, one in which her allies betray and kill her. Letitia asks Jean's feelings about the vision, and Jean, calm as ever, confesses that she bears no grudge and only wishes for the war to end. Letitia also inquires about Jean's thoughts on Shiro, to which Jean replies that she hasn't yet formed a clear opinion of him. The next day, Jean encounters Sieg in the castle corridors as he heads to deliver supplies to the small nursing home. She offers to assist him, but Sieg gently declines, assuring her not to worry. However, shortly afterward, Sieg collapses. Jean quickly carries him to a bed, staying by his side until he regains consciousness. When Sieg wakes, he finds Chiron, his servant, and a few others gathered around him. Chiron, after examining Sieg's condition, concludes that the frequent transformations he's undergone are gradually turning him back into the real Siegfried. Sieg now faces a difficult choice: either accept his fate and become Siegfried, or continue as he is. Left alone to contemplate, Sieg reflects deeply, eventually deciding to stay true to his own identity, despite the cost. At the next clan meeting, they learn of Jack the Ripper's gruesome rampage spreading across the city. Fiore requests Jean's assistance in tracking down and eliminating the notorious killer. Everyone agrees on the plan, and Chiron asks Fiore for a detailed description of the assassin. Astolfo warns them to be cautious, as they have very limited knowledge about Jack the Ripper. Even so, they all prepare themselves for the inevitable battle, knowing that they must be ready when the time comes to face this ruthless adversary. After the meeting, the servants head to Tryphus to investigate a new series of murders, discovering 8 victims with their hearts violently ripped from their chests. They discuss the killer's motives, speculating on the assassin's endgame. Calls volunteers to tap into one of the slain mage's memories, immersing himself in the final moments of terror. Moments into the trance, he screams in agony, overwhelmed by the excruciating pain. While entranced, he repeatedly mutters, "I know them all." When Chiron brings him back, they interpret the words, realizing, to their horror, that the assassin's next target is the castle itself. Urgently calls Fiore, urging her to flee, but it's too late. A thick, poisonous mist has already begun to shroud the castle grounds. Archer, realizing the danger, races back to the castle, followed by the others who sense the impending threat. Meanwhile, Sieg has been escorting the homunculi outside to safety. Remembering that Fiore is likely unguarded, he hurries to find her. Fiore, aware of the threat, moves through the mist with a handkerchief over her mouth, hoping to avoid detection. But Jack the Ripper soon tracks her down, taunting Fiore about her disability and making cruel remarks. Summoning her mechanical spider legs, Fiore lifts herself from her wheelchair, attempting to escape. Just as Jack prepares a killing strike, Sieg arrives in time to wound her, drawing her attention. Enraged, Jack engages in a fierce battle with Sieg. Chiron soon joins, and after a short but intense fight, Jack is forced to retreat. Once the group regathers at the castle, Fiore addresses her allies, insisting they must eliminate Jack the Ripper, or risk the destruction and fear spreading even further. The next day, Jean and Sieg set off to Tryphus, intent on using themselves as bait to lure Jack the Ripper into a confrontation. Despite Sieg's visible fatigue, Jean encourages him to stay resilient, explaining that their presence will help draw out the elusive assassin. Along the way, Sieg expresses concern for Letitia, Jean's human host. Jean reassures him that as long as Letitia conceals her magic, she should blend in without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, in Igd Millennia's town, Jack the Ripper listens to her master play the piano, basking in the rare moment of praise that flusters her deeply. Sieg and Jean soon arrive in town, where they decide to pick up some souvenirs for their friends at the castle. Sieg, unsure of how to enjoy these simple activities, feels nervous and a bit lost in the bustling market. Sensing his unease, Jean decides to show him how to engage with the people around them, guiding him through the lively marketplace and encouraging him to interact with the townsfolk. Their day of exploration eventually brings them to a wedding ceremony, which they attend together. As evening falls, Jean and Sieg stroll together, reflecting on the day. Jean commends Sieg's maturity, and sensing his motivation, asks if he's driven by a desire for revenge against Jack the Ripper. Sieg admits he's not after personal revenge, but wants justice for the many homunculi lives the assassin has taken. Jean opens up about her own past, revealing how, despite risking her life for her people, she was ultimately betrayed and condemned to burn at the stake. Moved by her story, Sieg offers words of comfort, catching Jean off guard as she finds herself blushing. Embarrassed, she quickly looks away, yet the moment deepens their understanding and respect for each other as they prepare for the challenges ahead. On the floating fortress, Shiro meets with Achilles, asking if he's seen Atlanta, who had abruptly left. Achilles informs him that he sent her to Tryphus to keep an eye on the town, hoping she might spot the assassin. Before Shiro leaves, Achilles takes the opportunity to ask why Shiro chooses to save humanity rather than destroy it, given humanity's harsh treatment of him. Shiro explains that he abandoned his hatred long ago after witnessing the flaws within the world's systems. Instead of fostering resentment, he decided to act and repair what he saw as broken. He expresses his hope that Achilles will fully support his vision. Sensing Shiro's conviction, Achilles doesn't press further and leaves, but on his way back, he encounters Semiramis, who lightly needles him before going her own way. Elsewhere, Sieg and Jean enjoy a quiet moment over tea at an outdoor cafe. Sieg asks Jean about her thoughts on Shiro. She admits she's still undecided, uncertain if Shiro's plan to save humanity is just or misguided. Jean wonders if her interference is even necessary, admitting that perhaps trying to stop him could be a sign of her own arrogance. Despite her uncertainty, Sieg thanks her sincerely for always supporting him, recognizing that she's gone out of her way to protect and guide him, even when it wasn't required of her. Jean quietly accepts his gratitude, understanding the mutual respect that has grown between them. By nightfall, Astolfo patrols Tryphus from her flying mount, when the familiar poisonous mist begins to seep through the streets, a sure sign that Jack the Ripper is preparing to strike again. Jean immediately transforms into her true ruler form, while Sieg rushes through the misty streets, searching for anyone left outside. He spots a woman appearing injured by the mist, and when he gets close, she reveals herself, pointing a gun at his heart and pulling the trigger 3 times. Despite the shots, Sieg remains unharmed. He removes the bullets and charges after Jack the Ripper's master, who quickly summons Jack to the scene. Jack strikes first, delivering a deep slash to Jean's abdomen. However, Jean's body neutralizes the curse, allowing her to counter the attack. Jack, in desperation, throws an unconscious civilian at Jean to create a distraction, but Archer's well-aimed arrow strikes Jack, injuring her. Her master immediately intervenes, carrying the injured Jack away to safety. Jack, having lost a leg, is weakened and unable to walk, so her master hoists her onto her back and retreats. Atlanta, the Archer of Red, fires an arrow at Jack's master, hitting her in the chest and causing her to collapse. Approaching to finish the job, Atlanta releases another arrow to take Jack out. Believing both Jack and her master to be defeated, she moves closer to inspect the bodies. However, Jack awakens, her form twisted into a monstrous, zombie-like version of herself. Amplifying the poisonous mist around them, Jack becomes even more powerful, preparing to unleash her newfound strength in a last stand against her enemies. The toxic fumes drag her into a haunting trance, where she finds herself surrounded by ghostly children, accusing her of taking away Jack's mother and master. Atlanta pleads with them to leave her, but the vision shifts, and she sees a memory of herself from the days when she lived among the gods. In this vision, she is braiding one of her sister's hair and recounting how the goddess Artemis rescued her as an abandoned infant, left in the woods by a father who didn't want a daughter. Suddenly, the scene fades, and Atlanta returns to her trance, this time surrounded by hundreds of spectral children, who close in on her from every direction. Meanwhile, Sieg falls into a trance of his own, where he witnesses disturbing visions of children suffering, some killed and others abandoned. Jack appears before him, explaining that he's in a realm representing the fate of unwanted children, those born and unborn, discarded and forgotten, their souls mingling in the depths of the River Thames. Overwhelmed by the despair and cruelty of the world he's seeing, Sieg feels a deep sorrow for humanity. Astolfo searches frantically through the poisonous mist, calling out for Sieg but receiving no reply. Chiron informs her that he can no longer sense Sieg's presence in this plane, yet Astolfo continues her search, undeterred. Jean, too, finds herself ensnared in the nightmare conjured by Jack. Recognizing the illusion, she uses her magic to shield herself, maintaining a tenuous hold on reality. Sieg, meanwhile, sinks onto an outdoor bench within the trance, feeling hopeless and lost. Jack's master appears, whispering to him about the darkness and injustice woven into the fabric of the world. As Sieg wrestles with despair, she fades away, collapsing as though dead. Left alone, Sieg is pulled deeper into the trance, where Jack the Ripper confronts him, surrounded by the spectral children. She asks him about her mother, her voice filled with a haunting innocence. Overcome with fear and sorrow, Sieg struggles to respond, but the pain and despair of the vision render him speechless, leaving him trapped in Jack's nightmarish world. In her trance, Jean finally reaches Jack the Ripper, who is shocked that Jean shows no fear toward her. Jack questions her, and Jean replies that she views them all as victims to be pitied, not feared. Trying to manipulate Jean's compassion, Jack conjures more spectral children, pleading for forgiveness. But Jean, resolute, tells them that as their souls have been corrupted by darkness, she must now release them. The children recoil, fearful of what Jean is about to do. Just as Jean prepares to finish the mission, Atlanta arrives, halting her. Deeply affected by her own past, Atlanta would rather die than see a child suffer or perish. Jean attempts to reason with Atlanta, explaining that freeing the children's souls is their only path to peace. But Atlanta, unwilling to accept this, accuses Jean of not understanding the true devastation of war. Shocked, Jean reveals that she has endured every Holy Grail war and carries no regret for the outcome of her mission. Atlanta, fighting tears, begs Jean to spare the children. One of the spectral children approaches Jean, asking if releasing them will indeed bring them peace. Jean reassures the child, and then with a heavy heart completes her task, freeing the children's souls and allowing them to find rest. In her final moments, Jack the Ripper accepts her fate, understanding the punishment for her actions. With a calm acceptance, she says her goodbyes and lets go, her soul ascending to find peace at last. With Jack's spirit at rest, Atlanta, overcome with rage, launches a barrage of arrows at Jean. Jean blocks most of them, preparing herself for Atlanta's wrath. Astolfo and Chiron arrive just in time, tipping the odds against Atlanta. Forced to retreat, Atlanta flees back toward the floating fortress, with Astolfo following her to track her movements. Afterward, Jean finds Sieg and, sensing his shaken spirit, gently explains the complex and often cruel nature of humanity. She urges him to keep his heart warm, to hold on to kindness despite the bitterness and coldness he may face. Touched by her words, Sieg promises to stay true to his convictions. As Chiron returns to report Atlanta's successful escape, he excuses himself to rejoin his master, Fiore. Sieg, curious about Atlanta's parting words, asks Jean why she was so adamant in her hatred. Jean explains that Atlanta likely sees her as an evil figure, a sentiment she can't change. Putting the matter aside, Jean asks Sieg to return to the castle with her. Reflecting on all he's witnessed of the world's darker side, Sieg takes a moment, then joins Jean, determined to continue his journey with renewed resolve. Fiore convenes with her allies, strategizing their next move against the floating fortress. They agree that the best course of action is to infiltrate the fortress and retrieve the Holy Grail before it leaves Romania's borders. Their main obstacle, however, is bypassing the fortress's formidable defenses. Astolfo suggests using her noble phantasm to disable the fortress's magical barriers. For it to work, however, they need a moonless night, like the night of a new moon, which is 3 days away. With the timing set, Fiore and the group prepare for the upcoming battle. That evening, Calls has a heartfelt conversation with Fiore about her capacity to lead the war and their clan. He gently points out that, due to her compassionate nature and her struggle to witness suffering, she may not be suited for the ruthless life of a mage. Calls suggests she transfer the family crest to him, so he can carry the clan's responsibilities. Although Fiore feels powerless and tearful, Calls reassures her that she's perfect just as she is, capable of contributing in ways beyond war and sacrifice. Later that night, Jean meets with Sieg, discussing the upcoming battle and their roles. Their conversation is interrupted when Jean accidentally encounters Astolfo coming out of the bathroom, naked, prompting a startled scream from Gina. The following day, Sieg and Astolfo take a stroll through Trifas, enjoying a brief respite. Astolfo, drawn by the aroma of a delicious pie at a nearby restaurant, eagerly pulls Sieg inside, insisting he buy it for her. To their surprise, they find Mordred already seated, enjoying a hearty meal of steak and eggs. The two groups exchange glances, unexpectedly encountering each other outside the battlefield, adding a moment of unexpected camaraderie to the otherwise tense days leading up to the battle. Elsewhere, Calls and Fiore prepare for the crest transmission ritual. Chiron gently puts them to sleep to begin the delicate process. During the first stage, Calls' body initially rejects the transfer, causing a violent reaction. This resistance pushes him into a trance, where he sees a vision of Fiore holding her beloved childhood dog. In the vision, Fiore willingly hands the dog to Calls, symbolizing her trust in him to carry on their family's legacy. Calls awakens from the trance, adjusting to the new weight of responsibility within him. Fiore, watching her brother recover, expresses her pride in his strength and resilience. Meanwhile, Sieg and Astolfo watch Mordred finish her meal. Sieg, driven by curiosity, asks Mordred what she truly thinks of people. Mordred candidly lists humanity's flaws, then turns the question back to Sieg, asking for his perspective. Sieg admits that he once viewed humans as kind and wise, but his encounter with Jack the Ripper exposed him to the darkness within humanity. Mordred dismisses the complexities of human nature, focusing instead on her ambition to obtain the Grail and become England's rightful king. After sharing her goals, Mordred departs. On the way back to the castle, Sieg and Astolfo cross paths with Jean, who joins them. With Sieg walking a few paces ahead, Jean takes the opportunity to ask Astolfo some personal questions about him. Sensing Jean's growing admiration for Sieg, Astolfo playfully encourages her feelings without embarrassing her, deciding to act as her supportive wingman. Astolfo calls out to Sieg, suggesting he check on Jean. Sieg, thoughtful as ever, reassures Jean of her well-being, yet he reflects on his sense of failure for not protecting the children during the encounter with Jack the Ripper. Jean gently reassures Sieg, telling him that his compassion makes him a remarkable master for Astolfo. She reminds him that even in a world filled with darkness, his efforts and his heart are what make him truly honorable, encouraging him to see himself as more than his perceived failings. Buoyed by her words, Sieg continues the journey back to the castle with newfound resolve, grateful for Jean and Astolfo's encouragement. That night, Calls wheels his sister Fiore to her room, expressing his wish for her to keep the castle warm, while he and the others confront the final battle on the floating fortress. Fiore, however, is determined to fight by his side, declaring she will join him in the fray. Calls smiles, touched by her resolve, and welcomes her to the mission. Shortly after, Fiore meets Chiron, the Archer of Black, on a balcony to speak with him one last time before the battle. In a heartfelt gesture, Chiron kneels, thanking Fiore for being the best master he has ever served. Flustered yet honored, Fiore accepts his gratitude, knowing the bond they share will guide them through the war. Meanwhile, Calls, back in his room, contemplates the daunting challenges ahead. Just as his thoughts turn bleak, a small flower from Berserker drifts into his hand, reminding him of the sacrifices already made and renewing his resolve. Elsewhere, Jean reflects on her unusual worry over Sieg's involvement in the war. She finds herself troubled, feeling a strong reluctance to see him risk his life in the coming conflict. As dawn nears, Necromancer and Mordred prepare their plane for the assault on the floating fortress. Mordred, reflecting on her unresolved ambition to surpass her father, King Arthur, admits her concerns about reclaiming the throne. Necromancer offers her sage advice on how to face this inner battle, encouraging her to focus on the fight at hand. Mordred, steeling herself, thanks Necromancer, feeling more determined and grounded. On the floating fortress, Atlanta finds Achilles, and with a somber tone, asks if he believes the lost children could still be saved. Achilles, realistic and slightly resigned, tells her he doesn't think so, and she leaves quietly, burdened by the answer. As dawn approaches, the inhabitants of the fortress gather to watch the sunrise. In the stillness, they seem to await something extraordinary, knowing that with the coming day, a pivotal battle, and perhaps fate itself, awaits them all. Early that morning, Gordes and a few homunculi gather to bid farewell to Fiore, Sieg, Calls, Jean, and Astolfo as they set off from the castle, offering them good luck for the journey ahead. Meanwhile, on the floating fortress, Shiro takes a final, contemplative look at the rising sun, steeling himself for the execution of his plan to save humanity. By nightfall, Fiore, Calls, and the others arrive at the airport and meet up with Necromancer and Mordred. They review the mission once more before boarding the planes bound for the floating fortress. The plan is clear. Sieg must stay close to Astolfo at all times, ensuring they never become separated. The rest of the group will divide into teams to infiltrate the fortress, targeting key areas to weaken its defenses. Before takeoff, Fiore grants Chiron permission to use his noble phantasm at his discretion, a sign of her deep trust in him. Chiron accepts her generous gift, expressing his gratitude before stepping away. Jean, seizing the moment, takes Sieg aside and warns him once again to stay out of danger as much as possible. Turning to Astolfo, she emphasizes the importance of protecting Sieg at all costs. Astolfo nods with fierce determination, summoning her flying mount. As the majestic eagle arrives, she and Sieg climb aboard, preparing for the journey to the floating garden above. With the final preparations complete, the team begins their ascent, each one carrying both hope and a heavy sense of purpose. Before entering the Holy Grail, Shiro calls upon his caster servant, using a command spell to ensure he refrains from writing a tragic outcome about this battle. Caster hesitates, expressing that such a request might be beyond his nature, but Shiro strengthens the spell, compelling him to comply. Just then, Semiramis arrives, guiding Shiro closer to the Holy Grail. Upon reaching it, Shiro finds a way to force himself inside, disappearing within and leaving Assassin and Castor alone in the room. Assassin seizes the opportunity to confront Castor, questioning his intentions for the Grail. In response, Castor turns the question on her, asking why she is so willing to serve Shiro. Caught off guard, Assassin inadvertently reveals her admiration for Shiro, sharing her desire to understand and experience his worldview. Castor calls her out on her feelings, which irritates her further. Before things escalate, however, the Black Faction forces arrive, interrupting their exchange. Realizing the urgency, Assassin rallies the Red Faction servants, organizing them for the imminent battle and assigning roles swiftly. Atlanta requests that Assassin leave Jean to her, harboring a personal grudge against the ruler. Outside the fortress, Jean and her allies approach on magically controlled planes. Jean calls out for Shiro, but it is Semiramis who answers, sharply silencing her. Moments later, the Red Faction servants emerge, engaging the Black Faction in a fierce battle. Achilles and Chiron immediately clash, with Achilles reveling in the challenge while Atlanta confronts Jan. Driven by her deep resentment, Atlanta fights Jan with relentless intensity. Jan, staying composed, carefully studies Atlanta's moves, sensing the depth of her anger. Meanwhile, Chiron traps Achilles, pulling him off his flying horse, Pegasus. The two end up on Chiron's plane, where they pause for a classic exchange about their beliefs and motivations. Achilles reveals his desire to live freely, unbound by the expectations of others. With their mutual respect established, the two warriors charge at each other, fully prepared for the decisive clash. Chiron and Achilles clash, but they pause once more to exchange words. Chiron asks Achilles about Shiro's ultimate plan to save humanity. Achilles explains that Shiro intends to harness the third magic, Heaven's Feel, to materialize all human souls and revive the dead. With this power, he hopes to create a world free from war and suffering. Chiron, pondering this vision, asks why Achilles supports such a plan. Achilles reveals that he's grown weary of losing loved ones to endless conflict and simply wants the fighting to end. Chiron, understanding his former student's pain, nods in agreement before they resume their battle. Meanwhile, not far from the intense duel, Astolfo and her master, Sieg, prepare to activate Astolfo's noble phantasm. As the new moon rises, Astolfo brings out her grimoire and casts a powerful magic negation spell, effectively neutralizing Semiramis's attacks. Realizing Astolfo's spell may overpower her own, Semiramis escalates the strength of her assault, but Astolfo's spell holds, allowing her to shatter one of the fortress's defense points. Frustrated, Semiramis commands Lancer of Red, Karna, to intercept Sieg and Astolfo. Karna arrives, relentlessly pursuing Astolfo and Sieg around the fortress. They skillfully dodge his attacks until Necromancer and Mordred arrive to assist. Coordinating with her master, Mordred dives into the fray as Astolfo continues borrowing Sieg's magic to fend off Karna's attacks. However, as Karna's blows intensify, Sieg realizes that he must confront Karna directly to buy Astolfo enough time to dismantle the fortress's defenses. Transforming into the true saber, Sieg challenges Karna, drawing his attention away. With Sieg's distraction in place, Astolfo resumes her mission, systematically destroying the fortress's defenses. Semiramis, desperate to protect her stronghold, hurls beams of destructive purple energy toward Astolfo, who dodges as best she can. With only 2 defense points remaining, a beam strikes Astolfo, causing her to falter. Despite her injuries, Astolfo pushes forward, determined to fulfill her mission. She manages to obliterate the remaining defenses before crashing onto the fortress. As she lies vulnerable, Semiramis appears, intent on finishing her off. At the critical moment, Mordred arrives just in time, blocking Semiramis's attack and standing protectively over Astolfo. Achilles unveils his noble phantasm, thrusting his spear into the plane and transporting himself and Chiron into a bright, alternate dimension. The dark night dissolves, replaced by a glowing battlefield that exists outside of time. Achilles steps forward, challenging his former teacher to a duel where only one will leave alive. Chiron, accepting the terms, exchanges a few final words with his student. They bump fists in a gesture of respect, then begin their duel with full resolve. Initially, Achilles gains the upper hand, delivering a fierce kick to Chiron's eye. Chiron, however, counters, striking at Achilles' famous weak point, his heel. The battle rages on, both warriors pushing each other to their limits. Chiron unleashes a rapid barrage of punches, which Achilles manages to block, biding his time. When the opening comes, Achilles launches a powerful strike directly into Chiron's stomach, bringing him down. Chiron, grateful for the honorable end, expresses his thanks to Achilles in his final moments. Believing he's secured victory, Achilles relaxes his guard. Just then, with his last breath, Chiron asks Achilles to lend his noble phantasm to the Black Faction's cause, humbly requesting his aid. Achilles, moved by the request, agrees to consider it. As a parting gift, Chiron raises his finger to the sky, summoning the Sagitta star to conjure an arrow that strikes Achilles' left heel, stripping him of his immortality and leaving him vulnerable. As the plane crumbles, Achilles leaps onto another functioning plane, leaving Chiron's plane to fall and crash, carrying his mentor with it to the ground below. Achilles' thoughts are interrupted by Atlanta's voice as she battles Jean. Having exhausted her conventional attacks, Atlanta resorts to her ultimate move. Drawing her sword, she activates her noble phantasm, Agrius Metamorphosis, transforming into a colossal purple beast, 10 times her normal strength. Jean desperately tries to reason with Atlanta, urging her not to sacrifice her humanity for revenge, but Atlanta insists it's the only way to avenge them, vowing to destroy Jean, whom she holds responsible. Meanwhile, Sieg is badly wounded, bleeding heavily after his intense battle with Lancer. As he catches his breath, Lancer unexpectedly calls to him and Calls, who had been hiding nearby, requesting their assistance. He asks them to help free their original masters from Shiro's control before they resume fighting. Calls agrees, slipping into the upper chambers to release the captive masters. Once he's done, Lancer prepares for the next round, signaling his readiness to continue. Before the duel begins, Sieg requests that Lancer spare Jean after their battle. Lancer firmly replies that he intends to spare no one, reminding Sieg that in war, mercy is rare. He then challenges Sieg to summon Siegfried's power once again, eager to finish their clash once and for all. Sieg, determined, calls forth Siegfried's spirit, answering Lancer's challenge. Meanwhile, the battle between Jean and Atlanta intensifies, with Atlanta relentlessly overpowering Jean. Jean struggles, held back by a lingering guilt over the children she saved from eternal suffering. Demanding an apology, Atlanta confronts Jean, but Jean, resolute, states she has no regret for her actions. She maintains that the children's corrupted souls needed release for salvation. As her body deteriorates from the strain, Atlanta advances, preparing to unleash her noble phantasm, Tauropolos, in a desperate attempt to finish Jean. Atlanta corners Jean, poised for the final strike, but just as she closes in, Achilles intervenes, stepping between them. He urges Jean to leave and find another fight, assuring her he'll handle Atlanta. Achilles, weapon in hand, faces his sister with resolve, summoning his spear as he prepares to face her once more in a battle of honor, seeking to stop her before she loses herself completely. Jean confronts Semiramis in her chamber, where the assassin of Red awaits, resolute in her master's vision. Jean questions Semiramis about her unwavering loyalty to Shiro's plan to save humanity. Semiramis, fully committed, declares that she believes in her master's ideals and will protect his vision at any cost. Recognizing that words are futile, Jean readies herself for the fight, facing Semiramis with renewed determination. Meanwhile, Sieg and Lancer are locked in an intense battle, each unleashing their full potential. Lancer, finally letting go of his limitations, wields his lance with unrestrained force, while Siegfried, embodying the true power of the Saber of Black, meets him blow for blow. After a fierce exchange, Lancer decides to end the fight in a single decisive strike. Channeling his most powerful attack, he dedicates it to Siegfried, the mightiest warrior he's ever encountered. Siegfried responds by unleashing a beam of blue lightning in a final counterattack. As the two powerful attacks collide, Lancer's attack begins to overpower Siegfried's, threatening to destroy him. At that critical moment, Astolfo arrives, wielding Achilles' shield and using his noble phantasm to absorb the force of Lancer's strike. Stunned, Karna stares in disbelief, briefly exposed and vulnerable. Siegfried seizes the opportunity, rushing in to deliver a fatal blow to Lancer's heart. Mortally wounded, Lancer expresses his gratitude, thanking Siegfried for granting him an honorable end to their fight. Before his spirit fades, he apologizes to Sieg for his threats against Jean, urging him to reach her quickly as she now faces Castor. With that, Lancer departs in peace, and Astolfo, paying her respects, honors the fallen hero for his integrity. Elsewhere, Achilles continues his battle with Atlanta, skillfully dodging her relentless attacks. Finding an opening, he strikes, piercing her stomach and immobilizing her. Atlanta, now returned to her human form, accepts her missteps and thanks Achilles for standing by her even when she lost her way. Her spirit fades, and with a final glance of mutual respect, Achilles, wounded fatally himself, quietly joins her in death. With a sense of urgency, Sieg rushes toward the fortress, driven by his desire to reach Jean. Inside the floating fortress, Necromancer and Mordred wander through the dim corridors, sharing a rare moment of camaraderie. As they chat about Mordred's ambition to become king, Mordred turns serious and asks her master what he envisions for her future reign. Necromancer, with confidence, reassures her that when the time comes, she'll know exactly what to do. After a few more steps, they encounter Semiramis, the assassin of Red, who blocks their path. They exchange sharp words, taunting each other, until Semiramis strikes first by filling the room with a thick, poisonous mist. Sensing the danger, Mordred quickly kicks her master out of the room, shutting the door to face Semiramis alone. The Necromancer desperately attempts to summon Mordred back using his command spells, but they are blocked. Semiramis has already placed barriers around the room, severing Mordred from her master's call. As the toxic mist takes effect, Mordred's movements become sluggish, yet she remains resolute, pushing through the pain to charge at Semiramis. Despite her determination, Mordred struggles to land a single blow as Semiramis deflects each of her attacks. Growing desperate, Mordred musters her last reserves of strength, unleashing her most powerful attack, Blood Arthur, in a final effort to strike down the assassin. But Semiramis, activating her own noble phantasm just in time, transforms the entire chamber into a lethal, poisonous domain, amplifying the toxic mist. Mordred collapses to her knees, her body breaking down from the overwhelming poison. As Semiramis approaches, she taunts Mordred, urging her to abandon her master, Necromancer. In a haze of pain, Mordred's mind drifts back to her younger days, to the moment she first stood before the legendary sword, Caliburn. She remembers her father, King Arthur Pendragon, warning her of the dangers of wielding such a weapon, cautioning that it could cost her everything she held dear. Young Mordred hesitated, but even as she pondered Arthur's warning, her future self, fierce and determined, steps forward in her mind's eye and grasps the sword without hesitation. Reinvigorated by the memory and her deep-seated resolve, Mordred finds the strength to stand once more. Just as Mordred's strength begins to wane, she summons the last of her courage, rising to face Semiramis once more. At that moment, Necromancer re-enters the fray, defending his servant from the assassin's attacks. He injects a potent substance into Mordred's neck, boosting her power exponentially. Feeling a surge of renewed strength, Mordred charges towards Semiramis with fierce determination. Semiramis, in response, summons her massive spider-like creature to intercept Mordred, but Necromancer, using a command spell, directs Mordred to bring down the Assassin of Red. Mordred obliterates Semiramis's summoned creature, destroying Semiramis's spiritual core in a final decisive strike. The battle won. Mordred, now weary, finds her way back to her wounded master. Necromancer's injuries are severe, and he knows his end is near. With a faint smile, he thanks Mordred for her loyalty and suggests she consider forming an alliance with one of the Igd Millennia to stay in the mortal realm. Yet Mordred, choosing loyalty over survival, decides to remain by her master's side until the end. In a rare moment of lightheartedness, she picks up one of his cigarettes and takes a puff, coughing at the harsh taste, as Necromancer chuckles weakly. As he draws his final breaths, Necromancer asks Mordred if she enjoyed their last fight. Mordred, with a satisfied smirk, replies that she did indeed. Necromancer succumbs to his injuries, and Mordred's spirit fades alongside him, their bond holding strong to the very end. Elsewhere in the floating fortress, Jean encounters her next opponent, the caster of the Red faction. Using his art magic, Caster sends Jean into a trance, reminiscent of the one he had inflicted on Berserker. This time, Jean finds herself back in her hometown, surrounded by familiar sights and memories. Meanwhile, Sieg and Astolfo, en route to Jean's location, are suddenly hindered by a magical trap. Determined to reach her, Sieg dismounts from Astolfo's hippogriff and continues the journey on foot. Caster's art magic leads Jean through a painful journey, revisiting the darkest moments of her life. First, he takes her to her hometown, burdening her with guilt over the death of her people, as though their fate was solely her responsibility. Jean endures, pushing forward, only to find herself on a horrific battlefield, reliving the brutal battles she fought in the name of her people. Though shaken, she summons her resolve and withstands the agony of these memories. But then Caster drags her into a third, devastating vision. Jean watches as Sieg is burned at the stake by those she once called her people. Unable to bear the sight, Jean breaks down, begging Caster to spare Sieg from this fate. Yet Caster coldly reminds her that he is merely replaying her own memories. If she sees Sieg burning, it is because deep down, she fears she's led him to this end. With Jean weakened, Caster pulls her back to the fortress, summoning a vision of Marshal Gilles, a trusted figure from her past. To Jean's shock, the Marshal appears before her, seemingly real and tangible, a ghost from her memories come alive. At first, Jean attempts to reason with him, but he stuns her by displaying Sieg's severed head as a taunt. He confronts her, questioning her unusual attachment to Sieg. As ruler, Jean is meant to show impartial love to all of humanity, and yet here she is, showing favoritism to this one soul. Jean, struggling to find words, tries to explain her feelings, but the vision of Marshal grows harsh, blaming her for Sieg's potential fate and accusing her of failing her role as the ruler. Each word deepens her despair, breaking down the resolve she had held so firmly, and leaving her to confront her own fears and regrets as Caster's vision works to dismantle her spirit piece by piece. Inside the Holy Grail, Shiro stands upon a battlefield strewn with the aftermath of endless conflict. Reflecting on humanity's faults and failings, he resolves to forgive mankind's sins and embrace his mission to save them. Reaching the core of the Grail, he declares his wish to make humanity immortal by materializing their souls, freeing them from the suffering of mortal existence. The Grail grants him an audience, and Shiro reveals his plan, to restore humans to the ideal form he believes the creator intended for them. Meanwhile, Jean is trapped in a state of despair, tormented by the doubts instilled by Castor and the vision of Marshall. Her sense of self falters as they taunt her innocence and purpose. But as she wrestles with her despair, Shiro emerges from the Grail's depths, appearing in the fortress to his gathered servants. With a calm but zealous conviction, he declares that he has completed the third magic, which will soon transform humanity. He tells Jean that soon, humans will become immortal beings, finally free from the flawed existence they've endured. Jean, though shaken, musters her voice, determined not to let Shiro's words overpower her belief in Sieg. Marshall, still holding a vision of Sieg's death over her, urges her to accept that the homunculus is gone, that there is no hope for him. But Jean, steadying herself, declares her faith in Sieg, asserting that he will not fall so easily. Her defiance surprises Castor, who, impressed by her resilience, acknowledges her strength in resisting their psychological attacks. At that moment, Sieg bursts into the Grail's chamber. Rushing to Jean's side, she notices that he has used up all his command spells, despite her warning to save one for emergencies. Sieg, unfazed, explains that he used them to defeat Lancer, knowing the sacrifice was necessary. Jean, saddened by the toll this war has taken on him, apologizes for involving him in the conflict. But now, determined to end Shiro's plan, she steps forward to confront him. Marshall tries to persuade Jean to accept Shiro's vision, believing it will bring peace and salvation. But Sieg speaks up, expressing his belief that humanity's current state, with all its flaws, is still worth fighting for. He insists that while some humans may fall to darkness, the majority strive toward goodness. Jean, with tears in her eyes, agrees and tells Marshall that she cannot support Shiro's salvation, for it lacks any hope or faith in humanity's potential. This revelation hits Marshall hard. He begins to cry, realizing that Shiro's plan, which he thought would atone for his past sins, offers no true redemption. Jean gently comforts him, assuring him that there is still hope for him and the rest of humanity. Moved by their conviction yet unwavering in his own, Shiro becomes emotional, revealing that he has spent 60 years of his life working toward this moment. Unwilling to abandon his mission, he draws power from the Holy Grail, preparing to strike down anyone who dares oppose him. Jean, recognizing the gravity of the situation, hands Marshall her flag as a token of gratitude, thanking him for supporting her until now. Marshall, humbled, accepts the flag with reverence. Jean then turns to Sieg, expressing her gratitude for his kindness and unwavering presence. Sieg nods, ready for whatever comes next. Jean pulls out her holy sword, gripping its sharp edge to activate her noble phantasm with her own blood. As she prepares for the final confrontation, Shiro charges forward, trying to stop her before she can unleash her power. In that decisive moment, Jean's determination flares, her noble phantasm fully igniting, embodying her unyielding faith in humanity and her resolve to protect it from Shiro's twisted vision of salvation, sacrificing himself to shield Jean from the deadly blow. With gratitude and sorrow, Jean says her final goodbye to Sieg before transforming into her warrior form to face Shiro in the ultimate battle. Shiro, determined to see his vision through, activates both of his noble phantasms, unleashing an inferno that engulfs the entire room. Jean bravely faces his overwhelming power, but the relentless onslaught proves fatal. Cradled in Sieg's arms, Jean fades from existence, her spirit departing, leaving only the unconscious body of her host, Letitia. In that somber moment, Sieg watches the person he cherished most vanish, a heartbreaking silence filling the aftermath. Ryder arrives to support Sieg, only to be intercepted by Assassin, who captures her and her mount. Placing Letitia's body in Call's care, Sieg draws his sword, steeling himself for the final confrontation with Shiro. With unwavering resolve, Shiro matches Sieg's defiance, and the two clash in a fierce duel. To everyone's astonishment, Sieg fights with strength and skill beyond his own, keeping up with Shiro's attacks like a legendary warrior. As the duel intensifies, Calls notices a familiar leaf, an echo of Berserker's blasted tree attack, emanating from Sieg. Calls, recognizing the unique advantage, shouts words of encouragement, urging Sieg to push through. With their swords locked in a deadly struggle, Shiro manages to stab Sieg in the upper arm, but instead of faltering, Sieg pulls Shiro close, summoning the full might of Berserker's blasted tree. In a final devastating attack, Sieg releases a torrent of energy that consumes both him and Shiro, ending the battle in a blinding explosion of power that annihilates Shiro and his dark ambitions once and for all. As the aftermath of the blasted tree attack weakens the floating fortress, it begins to crumble, collapsing piece by piece. Shiro awakens in Semiramis's arms, lying in a serene outdoor spot atop the fortress. Semiramis, having numbed his pain, holds him gently, allowing him a peaceful end. In these final moments, Shiro apologizes for deceiving her, admitting that he only wanted to achieve his mission. Semiramis, instead of showing anger, responds with quiet love, asking if he ever intended to betray her. Shiro reassures her that his goal was never to harm her. He simply wanted to see his vision fulfilled. Moved, Semiramis plants a gentle kiss on his lips, surprising him with a rare display of affection. Grateful, Shiro thanks her for granting him a painless death before he draws his last breath. Moments later, Semiramis fades away, returning to the underworld, her spirit now at peace. Inside the Holy Grail, Sieg waits, contemplating his final wish. Astolfo finds him, and relieved that he's safe, joins him. Suddenly, an imitation of Justei's, the Grail's manifestation, appears, ready to grant Sieg's request. Sieg tells her he wishes to reverse Shiro's wish for humanity's immortality, but Justei's explains that her power cannot undo the wish. The transformation of humanity is set in motion, a fate beyond her control. Sieg, pondering this, realizes that while the Grail remains in the world, humanity's destiny will continue on this unnatural path. Sieg then makes his final decision, requesting that Justei's turn him into the dragon Fafnir so he can carry the Grail to the reverse side of the world, thus removing its influence from humanity. Despite Astolfo's pleas for him to reconsider, Sieg remains firm, entrusting Ryder to carry his memories on Earth. Reluctantly, Astolfo agrees, knowing she must respect her master's resolve. She steps back, watching as Sieg transforms into the dragon, his new form powerful yet serene. Outside, Ryder gathers Calls and Letitia and leads them to safety as the fortress collapses. Meanwhile, the caster of Red, who has been chronicling the events of the fortress, accepts his fate, choosing to let himself be buried within its ruins, his story ending with the fortress's fall. Just beyond the fortress, Ryder sees Sieg, now transformed into the mighty dragon Fafnir, carrying the Grail away to the reverse side of the world, ensuring that humanity remains mortal and free to shape its own destiny. Letitia, watching Sieg's departure, recalls his bond with Jean, and silently hopes that one day, in some form, they may find each other again. For now, humanity is safe, and the world continues, imperfect yet hopeful, carrying the memories and sacrifices of those who fought for its freedom. A few weeks after the intense battle, life returns to a quiet normalcy, the world largely untouched by the epic events that had unfolded. Calls, still recovering from the experience, is summoned for an interview with one of the association's top mages. Despite the mage's stern demeanor, Calls is acknowledged for his efforts, even if he's labeled a failure for the loss of several masters. Afterward, as the mage reflects on the legend of Shiro, he contemplates the unwavering conviction that had driven Shiro's quest, pondering the balance between vision and consequence. Meanwhile, Leticia reconnects with Astolfo, sharing her memories of the war and the surreal experiences she lived through. She expresses gratitude for being part of such a momentous event. Astolfo, ever spirited, thanks Sieg for allowing her to stay and experience the world. The two take a joyful ride together, celebrating a last adventure before Leticia boards a plane back to France. As she flies home, Leticia reflects on Jean's love for Sieg, holding on to the hope that perhaps, somehow, their spirits might reunite. Astolfo, now free to explore, sits on an outdoor bench, enjoying the moment until boredom nudges her to summon her loyal mount. With a quick leap, she sets off to tour the world, leaving behind memories of the Grail War, yet looking forward to new adventures. In the epilogue, it is revealed that Sieg's journey ultimately led him to the moon, where the spirit of Jeanne d'Arc had found peace and awaited him. As they finally reunite, they smile, finding solace in each other's presence as they enter the afterlife together, their love enduring beyond worlds and wars. The Grail War closes with their story complete, a timeless bond amidst the stars.